August 4, 1983, Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. The sun had barely risen over the dusty capital when a convoy of military trucks rumbled down Avenue de l'Independence. The air was tense, heavy with a strange mix of fear and anticipation. In the back of one of those trucks stood a young man with piercing eyes, his military uniform crisp but unadorned. Captain Thomas Sankara, a man whose voice had begun to echo through Africa's corridors of change, was about to take power. That morning, as the trucks approached the presidential palace, soldiers loyal to Sankara moved swiftly. The radio station, Burkina Faso's lifeline to the world, was already secured. A young officer inside handed Sankara the microphone. With calm confidence, he spoke the words that would alter the nation's destiny. A revolution has begun for the liberation of our people. We will rely only on ourselves. From now on, the riches of Burkina Faso will serve Burkina. Outside, the crowd gathered, some cheering, others unsure. The man on the radio was different. He was not promising foreign loans or begging for international sympathy. He was promising something Africa had almost forgotten: dignity. When the world heard that a 33-year-old Marxist had seized power in one of Africa's poorest nations, laughter followed. Western diplomats called him the African Siachi. Others dismissed him as a romantic idealist destined to fail. And when photos emerged of him riding a bicycle to meetings, wearing a simple uniform, and banning luxury government cars, the mockery grew louder. To them, it was absurd. To Sankara, it was symbolic. He wanted to prove that leadership was service, not status. That a nation could build from within, without handouts. But the road ahead would test every conviction he held. Within days of taking power, Sankara renamed the country. Upper Volta, a colonial relic, was gone. The new name, Burkina Faso, meant land of upright people. It was more than rebranding, it was a declaration of purpose. He looked out at his soldiers and said, "We must dare to invent the future," and dare he did. In his first months, he cut government salaries, including his own. He sold off the fleet of Mercedes-Benz cars used by officials and replaced them with the modest Renault 5. He banned government use of air conditioners and luxury imports. Ministers who had grown used to French champagne and imported suits now found themselves sitting on wooden chairs, eating local meals, and cycling to work. The people laughed at first, some resisted. But slowly, something began to shift. Markets that once overflowed with imported goods started to carry Burkina-made cotton, leather, and produce. Civil servants who used to look to Paris for approval now looked inward for solutions. The air in Ouagadougou carried a different kind of pride, new, uncertain, but real. Still, Sankara's biggest battle wasn't against poverty or corruption. It was against dependency, the quiet addiction that had kept African nations chained to foreign aid. He saw it not as generosity, but as control. In one of his fiery speeches, he said, "He who feeds you, controls you." The world wasn't ready for that kind of honesty. But Sankara didn't care to please anyone. He cared to awaken his people, and that awakening was just beginning. Because in the following years, as the critics kept mocking his bicycles and his simple socialism, Burkina Faso would start doing something almost unthinkable for a nation once labeled one of the world's poorest. It began to build alone. 1984, Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. The capital buzzed with an energy no one had felt before. It wasn't wealth or luxury or foreign investment. It was momentum, real, tangible, grassroots progress. Everywhere you looked, something was being built. Schools, clinics, railways, water wells. And not by foreign contractors, but by ordinary Burkina citizens, many of whom had never picked up a shovel before. Sankara had declared a battle for development, and the people answered the call. He believed the nation's transformation had to come from within. So he launched a campaign that felt part movement, part miracle. Communities were mobilized to construct their own futures literally. Villagers built classrooms with local materials. Youth brigades dug reservoirs in regions scorched by drought. When asked where the funds came from, Sankara smiled and said, "From the strength of our people." That strength became Burkina Faso's greatest resource. He rejected the easy path of international loans, calling them poisoned gifts. Instead, he redirected government funds to where they mattered most: agriculture, health, and education. Within a year, food production soared. Farmers who once relied on foreign aid now fed their own communities. Burkina Faso became nearly self-sufficient in grains, something few thought possible in the Sahel. And while others laughed at his bicycles, Sankara doubled down on simplicity. His government ministers rode alongside him, cycling through Ouagadougou's dusty streets to inspect local projects. The image was both symbolic and radical, leaders and citizens moving side by side, no tinted windows, no guards blocking traffic, he once said. "We must learn to live the African way. It is the only way to live with dignity and independence." But Sankara's vision went far beyond infrastructure. He wanted to rebuild the Burkina spirit. He banned forced marriages and fought to end female genital mutilation policies that shocked traditionalists but empowered women across the nation. He made women's education a national priority and encouraged them to serve in the army, declaring, "The revolution and women's liberation go together." We do not talk of emancipation, we act on it. Soon, women were driving tractors, leading cooperatives, and commanding respect in a society that had long silenced them. Burkina Faso was not just changing physically, it was transforming culturally. International observers were stunned. Some were impressed, others were irritated. Sankara's refusal to bend to global expectations made him a target of quiet hostility. Western nations didn't appreciate being lectured by a young African captain in a cheap uniform. At the 1980 United Nations General Assembly, he stood before the world and said with calm fire, "Our revolution is not carried out by beggars. We produce what we consume, and we consume what we produce. We must learn to live standing, not on our knees." The room fell silent. No one could deny his courage, but behind the applause, powerful interests began to take note. Meanwhile, inside Burkina Faso, the spirit of self-reliance spread. Towns held days of solidarity where citizens volunteered labor instead of waiting for government aid. Villages pooled their savings to buy farm equipment. Schools launched programs teaching children how to grow food and repair tools. The country's literacy rate began to rise. Health campaigns slashed infant mortality. Trees were planted across the Sahel as part of Sankara's massive anti-desertification drive, over 10 million trees in just a few years. Still, not everyone was happy. The elite, stripped of their privileges, plotted in whispers. Some army officers grumbled about lost benefits. And neighboring leaders, who relied on Western funding, saw Sankara's example as a dangerous contagion. But for the people of Burkina Faso, hope had a new face. Not one printed on foreign banknotes, but one that looked like them, worked like them, and refused to kneel before anyone. The world could mock Sankara's bicycles all it wanted. But those bicycles were carrying a nation forward faster than anyone expected. October 15, 1987, Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. The city was unusually still that afternoon. The kind of stillness that feels heavy, as if the air itself knows something terrible is about to happen. At the presidential compound, Captain Thomas Sankara was meeting with members of the National Revolutionary Council. The meeting room was modest, bare walls, wooden chairs, a single fan humming lazily above. Outside, a convoy of military vehicles began to close in. Gunfire broke the silence. Sharp, echoing bursts that shattered the calm like glass. Within minutes, the building was surrounded. Inside, Sankara stood up. He didn't run. He didn't reach for a weapon. He turned to his men and said, "Stay calm, it's me they want." Moments later, he walked out, unarmed, facing the soldiers who had once called him comrade. He raised his hands, not in surrender, but as if to say, "You cannot kill what we have begun." Then came the shots. And just like that, the voice that told Africa to stand on its own fell silent. The men who refused foreign aid, who cycled through the capital, who taught his people self-worth, lay dead executed in a coup led by his closest ally, Blaise Compaoré. The news spread fast. Across Burkina Faso, disbelief turned to grief, and grief to anger. In the streets, mothers wept, and farmers stood frozen in their fields. For 4 years, Sankara had given them something rare, the feeling that their lives mattered. That Africa could build its own destiny without begging. Compaoré quickly took power, claiming the revolution had gone too far. Foreign aid resumed almost immediately. The bicycles disappeared, replaced once again by Mercedes-Benz convoys. The slogans about self-reliance faded into history. But history didn't forget. In just 4 years, Sankara had built more schools than the previous 23 years combined. He had vaccinated 2.5 million children against diseases that had killed generations. He had turned a nation once synonymous with drought and dependency into a symbol of possibility. And he did it without foreign loans, without corruption, without selling out his ideals. Even decades later, the world still debated how far he could have gone if he had lived longer. Would Burkina Faso have become Africa's model of independence? Or would the weight of isolation have eventually crushed his vision? No one will ever know, but the results spoke for themselves. Villages he once visited still tell stories of the people's captain, the man who worked beside them, ate with them, and refused to take more than he needed. Across Africa, his speeches are studied by young reformers searching for integrity in leadership. And those bicycles, the same ones the world once mocked, have become symbols of something deeper. They remind people that real progress doesn't arrive in limousines. It starts in motion, powered by one's own strength and direction. Sankara once said, "You cannot carry out fundamental change without a certain amount of madness." It comes from nonconformity, the courage to turn your back on the old formulas, the courage to invent the future. That madness built roads, fed people, and planted forests where there was only dust. It inspired movements far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. And even in death, Sankara's revolution didn't die, it simply moved into the hearts of those still fighting for an Africa that stands tall. Today, his murals cover the walls of Ouagadougou. His speeches circulate online, quoted by activists and dreamers alike. And each time someone chooses to build with what they have instead of waiting for what they were given, Sankara lives again. The critics mocked his bicycles, but in the end, it wasn't about the bicycles. It was about motion forward, fearless, and free. If you found Sankara's story inspiring, share this video. Let his message of self-reliance, courage, and integrity echo beyond Burkina Faso. History doesn't just remember leaders, it remembers lessons. And Sankara's greatest one still stands. Africa can build itself.